Okay, stop whatever you are doing, because I need you to understand the scale of what we're about to talk about. At its peak, the Mongol Empire covered 24 million square kilometers. That is bigger than the entire continent of Africa. It stretched from the Pacific Ocean to Eastern Europe, from Siberia to the Persian Gulf. One empire, one dynasty, one family, and it started with a 9-year-old boy who watched his father get poisoned by enemies, got abandoned by his entire tribe in the middle of the Mongolian steppe, and was left to die with nothing but his mother, his siblings, and a complete inability to accept that the universe had just destroyed his entire life. That boy grew up to become Genghis Khan, and in less than 25 years, less time than most Americans spend paying off a mortgage, he built the largest contiguous land empire in human history. This is not a story about luck. This is not a story about savagery. This is a story about one of the most tactically brilliant, politically sophisticated, and genuinely terrifying human beings who ever walked the face of the earth. He conquered half the known world. He killed somewhere between 40 and 60 million people, roughly 10% of the entire global population at the time. He also created the first international postal system, established religious freedom across his empire, and opened the Silk Road to free trade in a way it had never been before. He contained multitudes, and today we're going to get into all of it. But first, welcome to Sketchy Past, fast history, zero fluff, maximum chaos. If you've been watching and you haven't subscribed yet, now is literally the perfect moment. Hit that subscribe button, ring the bell, and join the Sketchy Empire. We are building something here, and the Mongols would tell you that showing up early is always the right move. Usually because they were already burning the city by the time everyone else arrived. But the principle stands. Let's go. To understand Genghis Khan, you have to understand where he came from. And where he came from was, to put it gently, absolutely brutal. Mongolia in the 12th century was not a unified country. It was a collection of nomadic tribes, Mongols, Tatars, Merkits, Naimans, Karaits, constantly raiding each other, stealing horses and women, forming alliances, betraying alliances, and generally operating in a state of low-level perpetual warfare that made Game of Thrones look like a neighborhood dispute. There was no agriculture, no cities, no written language. Life was organized around survival, herding livestock across the steppe, following the grass, staying mobile, and being tough enough to not die during the brutal Mongolian winters, where temperatures can drop to minus 40 degrees. Into this environment, around 1162 AD, was born a boy named Temujin, the man who would later name himself Genghis Khan. His father Yasuge was a minor tribal chief, important enough to matter, not important enough to be safe. When Temujin was around 9 years old, Yasuge was poisoned by Tatar enemies, rivals who had every reason to want the family line eliminated. He came home, got sick, and died. What happened next is the part that defines everything. The tribe, the people Yasuge had led, the people who owed their loyalty to his family, looked at Temujin, decided a 9-year-old was useless to them, and abandoned the entire family on the steppe. Mother, young children, no livestock worth mentioning, no protection, no food supply. They were left to die. Temujin's mother, Hogan, was made of something extraordinary. She gathered her children, foraged for roots and berries, caught fish with her hands, and kept the family alive through sheer will during conditions of shock. She was, by any reasonable historical standard, one of the toughest human beings who lived. Temujin watched her do this as a child. The lesson he learned was life was unfair, sometimes. The lesson he learned was loyalty is everything, betrayal is unforgivable. The only thing standing between survival and death is the quality of the people around you. This lesson would define every strategic and political decision he made for the rest of his life. As a teenager, Temujin was captured by a rival clan and enslaved, forced to wear a wooden collar and work as a prisoner. He escaped. He was betrayed by people he trusted, and had his young wife brought in kidnapped by the Merkit tribe shortly after their marriage, instead of accepting his loss, which in the context of the 12th century. Something was just happening. Temujin if structure and demand loyalty from the existing chiefs. He broke up the tribe entirely, dispersed its members among his existing forces, promoted based on ability and demonstrated loyalty rather than birth, and created a military organization that owed its allegiance to him, personally rather than to a tribal structure. Soldiers who fought well got promoted regardless of where they came from. Commanders who showed tactical brilliance were given more responsibility regardless of their clan affiliation. Enemies who surrendered and swore loyalty were absorbed and treated as equals. Enemies who resisted were destroyed. This sounds straightforward, but it was revolutionary. It meant that Temujin was building something that had never existed in the Mongolian steppe before. A professional military, with a chain of command, a promotion structure, and a unified identity. He also systematically destroyed the people of the Mongols. The Tatars who poisoned his farm. He killed every Tatar male taller than a contact sword, eliminating the fighting age while populating the children. The murderers who defended the attack destroyed. The childhood friend betrayed him. Genghis Khan, a man who had once been so close to Temujin that they'd sworn blood brotherhood together, ended up as his enemy after a series of political splits and was eventually captured and executed. Temujin reportedly gave Jamuka a noble death killed without the shedding of blood, which in Mongol culture was a mark of respect. He did not, however, let him live. That is a terrible personal right to all who say Temujin had done something no one had done. Decimal system Genghis Khan organized his entire army in the decimal structure. 10 soldiers formed the army, 10 armies formed the Zulu, 110 soldiers formed the Redrew, 10 millions formed the Zulu, 10,000. Every command was fitting a chain. roughly 160 pounds and an effective range of over 500 feet. Mongol warriors trained on horseback from childhood. They could fire accurately at a full gallop in any direction, including backward, the famous Parthian shot, and they could fire up to 12 arrows per M in ute. For reference, a medieval English longbowman was considered elite if he could fire 12 arrows per M in ute standing still. The feigned retreat, the Mongols' signature tactical move, was the feigned retreat, and it worked with an almost embarrassing consistency against enemies who should have known better by the third or fourth time they'd seen it. The concept, Mongol cavalry attacks, then suddenly turns and runs. The enemy, sensing victory, soldiers started running, actual panic If you don't know how to do something, find someone who does and hire them. The Mongol army rapidly acquired siege capabilities, catapults, battering rams, fire weapons, and adapted their tactics to the realities of siege warfare with a speed that stunned their enemies. The campaign against the Jin lasted years and was brutal, but it worked. By the time of Genghis Khan's death, the Jin were critically weakened, and his successors would finish the job. The Khwarezmian Empire, Central Asia, this is where things get genuinely complicated. The Khwarezmian Empire, controlling modern-day Iran, Afghanistan, Uzbekistan, and surrounding regions, was one of the wealthiest and most powerful states in the Islamic world in the early 13th century. Its ruler, Shah Muhammad II, controlled a population of millions and an army of several hundred thousand. Genghis Khan initially wanted trade, not war. He sent a caravan of 450 merchants to Khwarezm with goods and a message of peaceful commercial intent. The governor of the border city of redrew, suspecting the merchants were spies, massacred the entire caravan and seized the goods. Genghis Khan sent ambassadors to Shah Muhammad demanding justice. Muhammad executed the lead ambassador and sent the others back with their beards shaved off, a profound insult to the cultures of Central Asia. Genghis Khan went into the mountains alone for 3 days. Contemporary accounts say he was praying. He launched one of the most devastating military campaigns in history. The Mongol army invaded Khwarezm, estimated at somewhere between 50% of Europe's population. The Mongol conquests killed that percentage of the entire world. Here is the part of Genghis Khan's story that most people don't know, and it genuinely complicates the simple, brutal, barbarian narrative. The man who ordered the destruction of some of the greatest cities in the medieval world also established something that historians call the Pax Mongolica, the Mongol peace. Across the vast territory under Mongol control, trade was protected, roads were safe, and merchants could travel from China to Europe without being robbed, taxed into poverty, or killed by local warlords. The Silk Road, the network of trade routes connecting East Asia to the Mediterranean, had always existed in theory. Under Mongol rule, it functioned in practice. Marco Polo's famous journey from Venice to China was only possible because the Mongol Empire had made that journey physically survivable. Genghis Khan established religious tolerance across his empire, a radical policy for the 13th century. Shamanism, Buddhism, Islam, Christianity, and Taoism, all permitted to practice within Mongol-controlled territory. Genghis Khan himself appears to have been genuinely curious about different religious traditions, meeting with priests, imams, and monks, and asking them understood that you cannot create a new order without first dismantling the old one. Whether that calculus was worth the cost is a question historians and philosophers have been arguing about for 800 years. There is no clean answer. Genghis Khan died in 1227 during a campaign against the Xixia Kingdom in northwestern China. The exact cause of his death is unknown. Accounts vary between injuries from a fall from a horse, illness, and various other causes. He was somewhere between 60 and 65 years old. His death was kept secret for months, while his body was transported back to Mongolia for burial. Everyone encountered along the funeral was reported to prevent the location of his burial from being revealed. The burial party then ran the horses over the mountainside to avoid any trace, and the river was watered for 30 minutes. To this day, the tomb of Genghis Khan is known. His instructions were that no monument built, no marketplace, no record kept. The man who had redrawn the map wanted to return to the earth without a trace. The empire he built did not outlast him as a unified entity. It was divided among his sons and grandsons, eventually fragmenting into separate successor states. The Yuan dynasty in China under Kublai Khan, the Golden Horde in Russia, the Ilkhanate in Persia, the Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia. These successor states shaped the history of the region for centuries. Its genetic legacy is redrawn by Mongol conquest is partly his creation. You are living in a world that Genghis Khan helped shape. Whether you find that terrifying, fascinating, or both is probably the most honest response available. That was the Mongol Empire, the story of a boy left to die on the steppe who grew up to conquer half the known world, kill 10% of humanity, and accidentally create the conditions for the Renaissance by reopening the Silk Road. History is never simple. The best stories never are. If this video hit different, if you are sitting there genuinely recalibrating everything you thought you knew about the Mongols, then like this video because it tells the algorithm you're onto something. Subscribe to Sketchy Past so you don't miss what's coming next, and share this with someone who still thinks Genghis Khan was just a guy who liked horses next episode. We're going after